Hi again, sorry, it just means I'll be able to upload the videos more easily. So on to number 3, reasons why arguably there's been a bit of an increase in fundamentalist activity. So I remember we looked at Bruce, who broadly agrees with the features that Kaplan talks about, but says to really understand why there's been an increase in fundamentalist activity, you need to understand that there are different roots of it depending on where it develops in the world. And he looks at the West to start with, and he largely looks at America. And he says that in the West, the development of modern fundamentalism, so for example, evangelical Christianity in America, which has a very traditional stance on creationism, abortion, gay marriage, stem cell research, etc., the list can go on, and of course the Purity Pledge attached to it. They say that this kind of evangelical Christianity has taken off, and it certainly has. A quarter of Americans subscribe to it because they are resisting something that's changed within their own country, and that change has been the liberalisation of attitudes in America. So fundamentalism in the West, according to Bruce, is a response to domestic issues, something that happens within their own culture. However, when he looks at other areas in the world, and he talks about the third world, but I'd actually looked at areas like the Middle East, where fundamentalist organisations very often are reacting to things that have been imposed on them from another nation. So, for example, if we look at Iran in the 1970s, where a pro-Western regime had been set up, presumably to get good oil prices, and it had done rather ridiculous stuff like ban the Islamic calendar. There was then a coup, and Ayatollah Khomeini took over Iran with a very, very extremist version of Islam, and he was reacting to a change that had been imposed on Iran from the outside rather than a domestic issue. Okay, so was that the third reason? Yes, I think it was. Right, I'm just going to follow the order. Right, number 4 kind of links to Iran, actually, and that's this idea of cultural defence. And actually, you could use Iran for this again. We talked about cultural defence. It's Bruce again. If you're ever stuck for a name, religion, use Bruce. He said it. So Bruce talks about cultural defence, which is trying to defend your own culture when you feel it's been imposed upon or somehow eroded by another force. Now, of course, that's exactly what happened in Iran in the 70s. The pro-Western regime, as I said just now, really did impose some restrictions upon Islamic practices within an Islamic country. And you can understand how there was a kind of reaction against that. And Ayatollah Khomeini set up this rather brutal regime, sadly. Okay, you could also use Poland for cultural defence, that Catholicism was or became even increasingly important to people in Poland as a sense of who they were, their own identity, after communism imposed its rule on Poland and other areas of Eastern Europe in 1945. So you could use that, but bear in mind, that's not fundamentalism, but it is an example of cultural defence. Okay, I'm trying to whip through these. I think we're on to number 5, but my maths was never very good. Okay, Huntington and the Clash of Civilizations. So this is number 5. For me, there is so much at fault with this theory, but it is worth discussing. So do you remember Huntington carved the world up for his theory into 7 great civilizations? And I think we established when we talked about it that Africa appears to be missing. But you certainly wouldn't need to list all 7. But certainly there's the Islamic civilization, the Western civilization. If you can even remember a couple of them, that's fine. Now, what he argues is that increasingly religion binds us within these civilizations, but causes hostile them and us relationships between the civilizations. And certainly if you look at the Islamic world in the West, there is sadly some evidence of that for sure. But there are so many holes in this theory. I mean, I've gone over it very briefly, but missing out Africa is a notable one. If you look at the civilizations, there's also, some fairly heavy-handed racial overtones in his research, which I find quite hard to stomach. So have a look at that. Okay, useful in a fundamentalism essay though, because if there are increasing them and us relationships between these different civilizations, people may feel angrier and that they have to enforce their own view of the world and their own civilization. That, of course, could lead to fundamentalism. Okay, number 6, I think. This is an interesting one. I asked you to take some brief notes on secular fundamentalism. And I think it's well worth talking about this because I think secular or militant atheism, as Richard Dawkins calls it, and you can easily, if you just type in TED Talk, Richard Dawkins, you'll get a really interesting sort of half-hour talk on militant atheism, which is extremely interesting. And, you know, he makes some good points, but I think he also fits... he is branded in my mind as a fundamentalist as well, because he appears to have lost all tolerance for religious ideologies and only follows scientific and secular ideologies. So do have a look at that. It's worth knowing as well that the first wave of secular fundamentalism really came in the Enlightenment project after the Industrial Revolution, when people were looking to more rational explanations for the world and the universe. I think it's re-emerged recently with an increase perhaps in religious fundamentalism, which arguably has led to an increase in secular fundamentalism as we start to get more nervous of some religious groups. And certainly Richard Dawkins is leading a pretty big tirade against religions, and particularly the teaching and the belief in creationism, and is keen to reinforce ideas of evolution. Okay, just one more, if it's number 7, I would say is just the increased use of social media. We've already briefly talked about it, but certainly the fact that these groups can now reach much further into society online. And I would say getting children particularly to join a religiously fundamentalist group is akin to, hello Ferdy, is akin to grooming, quite honestly. So there's another idea that they can use social media for propaganda and recruitment. Okay, I hope that all made sense. I think it ended in 6 reasons. If not, apologies for my bad counting. All right, bye-bye.